So if you could start us off, Dr. Merkle, on the talking points on how to succeed for Christians entering college, and then I'm going to follow up with some how-tos on the admissions side of things.
Okay. Thank you. It's a pleasure to get to speak to you all. I'm getting more comfortable and familiar with Zoom and the Zoom platform than I ever wanted to be. Let me go ahead and kick off here. So the first, I've got a few points to cover, and the first is just the purpose and meaning of education. I think that this is a really important one as a Christian to start on, because there are a number of things that are really assumed about why we go to college that I think I think that we are having a twisted definition of what education is for, kind of shoved down our throats in a way that's really not helpful. Over the last 60 years or so, our conception of what college is for has been fairly radically reshaped, so that it used to be understood that college was about a particular kind of character formation, and that included intellectual formation, but it was about grooming you to enter into a particular role into society. And now the college has been, because of a couple of different impulses and forces and whatnot working on it, college has really been reimagined to be pretty much solely about credentialing you to get a particular job. So when you talk to, your uncle at Thanksgiving dinner and he asks you what you're going to study at college, what he wants to hear is that he wants to hear you name a particular degree that corresponds with a particular kind of job. And it's assumed that if you get this degree, you'll get that job. Now, the thing is that's actually not very true once you enter into the workforce. And this is when I really encourage you to tune into Rob Sense's session tomorrow. Rob is a part of EMSI, Economic Modeling Specialists Incorporated. They're crunching the data about how various college degrees perform in the workforce and what happens once you get a degree and how that moves along. He is going to give you a really interesting perspective, because everybody that tries to interpret for you what your college degree will do, they're all selling you something. And admittedly, I am as well. So you want to learn to kind of take it all with a grain of salt. And one of the things you'll see that colleges tend to do is they want to convey this idea that basically if you get this degree, it will get you this job. You get this degree in business, it will get you a job in business. You get this degree in mechanical engineering, it will get you this mechanical engineering job. And they do that to bring you in as a freshman, even though statistically the odds of you graduating with the degree that you first enrolled with are actually quite low. You're going to change around. And then once you actually move into the workforce, statistically, the odds of you staying in that same specialty path for very long at all is actually quite low. You're going to actually move around and become more and more versatile. And this is the way the job market is going just in general. 50 or 60 years ago, it might be that you would step into one position and you would stay in that position for life. Now it's really understood that you're going to move from position to position, and particularly with the way technology is moving so swiftly, it's shocking how swiftly one position becomes just irrelevant as new technology comes along, and that job is just no longer needed. So colleges want you to think that this degree equals this job, and one of the reasons why is because you're going to find that college prices are spiking, and we'll talk about finances in just a little bit at the end of my session, but the cost of college is going up and up, and a lot of that cost is being made possible by increasingly large federally backed student loans. So as long as the school can get you to go into debt to get student loans, they can keep raising their tuition. But in order to raise their tuition, they need to make this make sense to you. And the way they're going to make it make sense to you is by pairing their degree with a particular projected salary, which is associated with the career that degree will get you a job in. So when you go to talk to recruiters and whatnot, they're going to typically want to show you different degrees and the salary it's going to make. And once you see that salary, then suddenly you can justify the student loans that you're taking out, and you can justify the tuition. This is why for colleges, it kind of makes sense for them to try to push you down this hyper professionalized direction. However, as I said, the odds of you actually staying in one position for very long, or even at the age of 18, knowing what it is that you want to do for the rest of your life, is really kind of a stressful idea. I don't, it's kind of hard to think that you right now, there are the occasional kids. There's the occasional kid who, I don't know, it seems like it's a charismatic gift that some kids get, where at like 14, they just know, I'm going to be a doctor, and they know beyond a shadow of doubt, and that's the path they pursue their whole life, and they never waver one way or another. There are kids like that, and maybe you're one of them, but most of us are not like that. Most of us really are open to a whole variety of different things, and as you progress through college, you're going to change, and actually as you enter into the workforce, you're going to change. The other thing you're going to notice is that a lot of the actual professional skills that you need for performing that job are really best learned at the job itself, in more of an apprenticeship kind of way. This is why a lot of people are kind of questioning what is the value of college right now. You'll see a lot of people telling you, is it even worth, all that money? Because you're finding that that the actual vocational skills that are necessary for entering to that job, it's easy just to learn them on the job, and maybe that college degree wasn't necessarily worth it. So I think that this idea that the college degree is about acquiring these certain professional certifications, that's something that over the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to find questioned more and more. And a lot of people feel like maybe they were sold on a lot of student debt, being told that something was necessary that wasn't actually necessary. Now, I know it's going to sound really funny for me, a college president, to be saying, maybe this isn't what you need. But it's true. Maybe this isn't what you need. But I think that there's another way of coming at the question of college that actually puts college in the place that it was intended all along, and it can be a lot more valuable. And that is, there are certain, when you talk to Rob Sens tomorrow, he might refer to them as soft skills. They are, they're not the same thing as career certification, easily tangible, easily quantifiable skills like, do you know how to use Excel? Do you know how to use a word processor? Do you know how to code in this particular computer language? Those things are kind of easy to designate and then say, okay, I'm going to go take a 3-month class in that. I'll learn that skill. Okay, I understand. I can move on. But there's a set of skills that kind of sit underneath that are much more difficult to acquire, but when you acquire them, they perform at a much higher level. And these are the soft skills, and they have to do with critical thinking, the ability to communicate persuasively, clearly, precisely, the ability to be creative, the ability to work without somebody driving you, where you can actually, on your own self-pace, drive yourself and get things done. The ability to think out of the box, the ability to gather together a team and work with them and move them in a particular direction. There's a set of skills that a college degree, regardless of the name that is associated with it, that college degree could actually work to really stretch and expand your intellect and your mind in those categories. So, and this is already a dated illustration, but back in the 80s, you would get these computers, and you would have, and you could buy all these bells and whistles to go onto your computer, but unless you had the actual operating system itself at a certain size, then the speaker and the graphics card and the monitor and all these different things were worthless. And they were all the bells and whistles, but you needed the operating system itself to be able to handle all of these accessories. And I think a really good college education is like that operating system. I would encourage you to think in terms of, how do I get a degree that is going to push me in these more fundamental skills. So for myself, I ended up actually doing a chemistry undergraduate degree at the University of Idaho in education. And it's funny because I the moment I graduated the University of Idaho, I never ever again touched a test tube or balanced an equation or did any chemistry for the rest of my life. Nevertheless, I believe that actually that chemistry undergrad was ridiculously helpful to me because it taught me the hard disciplines of working through deep, deep problems that could take a whole week to, to work through, where you've got 10 pages of notes and you've, erased your way all the way through the page because you've had to redo it so many times. The mental discipline of working like that actually had massive implications for my ability to write a master's and a doctoral dissertation that I was going to defend at Oxford University in a completely different discipline, in a very different discipline. Nevertheless, there was a transferable skill there that was actually quite useful. I would say that there are a number of degrees that are useful, not because their name corresponds to a particular professional field, but because they inculcate in you the mental habits that are extremely useful for the kind of work that you need to do. I spoke not too long ago to a gentleman who, a very wealthy, successful man, and built and managed one of the largest hospital networks in the entire US. And I asked him, well, what was your undergraduate degree? Like, I'm assuming you were a doctor. I mean, how do you become the manager of a hospital and then the manager of a whole system, a network of hospitals? And when I asked him that, I'm thinking, you must have been biology, then doctor, then something like that. And he said, oh, no. I couldn't have ever done that with a doctor's education. I was a philosophy major. That's just, that was so striking to me. But his point was that he needed to learn how to think, how to think clearly. And that's what philosophy did for him. And that's why he was able to build this massive network and system. But the thing is if you critique your college degree based on does the name correspond to a job, and you tell your uncle at Thanksgiving, I'm going to get a philosophy degree, he's going to laugh at you and tell you you're going to be a barista for life, because of that assumption that the degree needs to have the name of the job that you're going to get. And philosophers are not necessarily a well-paid career path, but clear thinkers and precise thinkers actually succeed very well in life. So the first thing I want to encourage you to do is to think less in terms of the professional skill or the career path that's connected to the name of the degree, and think more in terms of how will that degree push me, and maybe push you in ways that you are not necessarily comfortable with. Maybe you want something that pushes you not in where your strength is, but maybe you need something that pushes you where your weaknesses are. That can be a really smart way to create a more well-rounded kind of intellect. I would encourage you, if you are going into anything in the liberal arts genre, which can be extremely rigorous and can give you exactly what I'm describing, or it can be a complete waste of time and a lot of people sitting around doing drugs and making stuff up. It really can be a whole wide range of different directions it can go. So I would really encourage you to look at not just the disciplines that you're going to be studying, but look at the people that are imparting these disciplines to you. If you want to spend a little bit of time visiting and see that these are people that believe in objective truth, believe in giving you a really fair and brutal evaluation of your work, that they will actually make it difficult for you, that they'll push against you, while at the same time rooting for you, helping you, mentoring you, discipling you. You want to look for all of those things together. I think that a hard science program can give you exactly what I'm describing, but I think the liberal arts can sometimes even more robustly, provided it's coming from, I really believe it needs to be rooted in an evangelical Christian worldview with people who believe that the word has objective meaning. And when you have that, you can get the kind of education that I'm describing. The next point that I was going to make for you, and this is probably a little bit more of a self-serving one. I know that I'm giving you general advice on college, so maybe the advice that I'm giving you might take you to a place like New St. Andrews, or it might take you elsewhere. That said, let me give you the argument for why, if you're coming from a classical Christian secondary education, either a classical Christian high school or a homeschooling curriculum that is using the classical Christian method, which seems to be even more popular these days. Why would you think about continuing on in another school that continues to use the classical Christian model? That's what New St. Andrews does. There are a number of other colleges out there like that use a classical Christian model at the second or at the college level. So why would you continue on? Because I can appreciate why for a lot of you would feel like, look, I did classical K to 12. If I go to a college that uses the classical model, I'm just going to be doing high school all over again, and I don't want to do something like that. I could see how that would be a really discouraging sort of idea of going that direction. What I've noticed, though, is that, well, I'll put it this way. This is the bad news. Those of you that have received a classical Christian education, particularly a really good one, the bad news is, in all honesty, your high school has ruined you for college. It just has, and it's hard to say it, but it's true. You've been ruined, and here's what I mean. Let me just give you some quick data for a moment. About 2/3 of the students who take the SAT and ACT, about 1/3 of the students who take the SAT and the ACT will test as college ready, prepared for college. 2/3 of them will be accepted and go on to college. That means half of your incoming class is not even ready for college. There was a recent study where they went through and did a really exhaustive survey of the critical thinking skills in freshmen and then tracked it as they progress up through the rest of college. And what they showed was that 45% of students who are entering college right now make no growth or improvement in their critical thinking whatsoever until their junior year. Their freshman or sophomore year, they make no growth or improvement whatsoever. I believe that's because that's the 50% who entered ready for college and are sitting there having to tread water while the rest of the class slowly either catches up or drops out. And it won't be until your junior year that you find yourself actually start to be challenged. I'm sorry, my computer's giving me all sorts of alerts. But it's not until your junior year that you find yourself actually challenged or pushed in any meaningful way. College is becoming just increasingly diluted and underachieving. In 1960, college was understood to be a 40-hour-a-week endeavor. When you went to college, you were going to be working for 40 hours a week. And at least 12 of those hours were going to be in class. The other 28 would be at home studying, preparing, writing papers, getting ready for your next class. But you had to put 40 hours a week into it in order to succeed in college. Right now, the average student is putting 17 and a half hours per week into college. Now, again, that's assuming 12 of those hours, at least 12 of those hours are going to class. That means they're putting 5.5 hours into studying. So 28 hours of studying to 5.5 hours of studying. College over the last 60 years has just been, it's becoming more and more of a joke. And I think that those of you that have gone to a rigorous classical Christian high school or homeschooling curriculum, you have been taught to think, you've been pushed, you've been taught to be interested in a whole range of different arguments. You've been taught that your teacher can answer questions at a certain level and expects you to perform at a certain level. You've had your expectations set at a certain level for what a class ought to look like, what argument ought to look like, what excellence should look like, what failure really should look like. You've had your expectations set at a different level, and I think in general, most of you are going to find that college and the colleges that you go to are going to radically undermine those expectations. They're going to come in far, far below. So when I say your education has ruined you for college, I'm saying that most colleges are not equipped to actually meet you at the level that you've been performing at over the last 12 to 13 years. And that's why a number of those classical Christian colleges deserve a real look from you, because they are accustomed to meeting students coming out of your senior year and meeting you there and then saying, and we're going to make your freshman year a true challenge to you. We're not going to wait until your junior or senior year to actually challenge you. That's to me why I think that it's actually worth it. I think that you'll find that I've just seen my wife teaches at a classical Christian school here in Moscow, Idaho, Logos School, which is one of the first classical schools. And she sees just regularly the kids. Some go off to a place like NSA, classical school, but a bunch of them go off to various state schools or other private colleges. And invariably they come back a year or two later and they go, this is just a joke. I mean, our senior year was so much more rigorous than what we're doing at a number of these fairly well-known schools. So I think that it's worth, if you enjoy what you're getting right now, it's worth at least considering, is this something I ought to push to the next level? And that's where we're going to take you. We're not going to redo your high school career. We're going to take you to the next level. If you liked playing basketball for your high school varsity team, this is the chance to play college level ball and to go to that next level and to do something much more intense and rigorous. So I would hope that you would at least give us a look as you think about it. I wanted to close just by talking a little bit about the financial package and that's out there. And I think this is something that's so, as you're looking at colleges, it's so important to know a little bit of the story behind the scenes and what's going on in the college world, because there are a number of games that are being played that if you knew about it, well, it would probably make you really angry to see what's actually happening. If any of you have applied to a private liberal arts college, any of the private colleges, then you probably applied to a place that had a tuition of around at least $30,000. Anywhere it could from 30 something all the way up to 60 some $1,000. And my guess is if you applied and then you also applied for financial aid, my guess is that you would have gotten at least a 50% scholarship. You were probably offered a scholarship of around 50% or more. The average, I think, is a little bit over 50% right now. And it's initially really sort of invigorating and thrilling, and because you feel like, oh wow, this really expensive school just set aside $20,000 for me that's got my name on it. It's like they're investing $20,000 in you. You need to understand that that money doesn't actually exist. It's a scam. Well, it's a scam. It's a trick that colleges use. It's called discounting, where you set your tuition really high. And I've talked to deans of colleges that do that, and they say, well, we set our tuition this high because that number signals a certain kind of prestige and excellence. And then once we've set the tuition this high, then we offer each of them at least half off in a discounted scholarship. That money doesn't exist. They're just knocking it off the sticker price. There's like the sweater that you get for half off, but it never actually sold for full price. So they knock at least half off, but they call it a scholarship. And it makes the student feel special because they got all this money from this really prestigious school, and you know it's really prestigious because it was so expensive. And even if, let's say, so like New St. Andrews, we keep our tuition as low as possible. So we're going to say about a $13K tuition. Let's say you're at a school where its tuition is $35,000 and they give you a $20,000 scholarship. Well, it's still $15,000 versus, say, NSA's $13,000. So it's still more expensive. But the argument from the recruiter will be, well, we've just invested $20,000 in you. We've invested $20,000 in you. So that means you ought to have some sort of loyalty to this academic program. It's just a game that they play. That money doesn't actually exist. It's just discounted. And you want to be aware of that. Now, this is something that exists with private schools. Public state schools don't do this necessarily nearly as much. It's mostly just the private colleges that do that. So once you get to the actual price and they knock that amount off, then you're probably usually looking at somewhere around 12 to 18,000 in tuition annually, but then you've got room and board on top of that. But you'll probably be looking at 12 to 18,000. Then you're going to be expected to take out a Pell grant. or apply for a Pell Grant at least, and then probably student loans on top of that to finish it off. The federal money, the Pell Grant and the student loans, just be aware the Pell Grant is just a gift. You're going to get it, and it's not going to, you don't have to repay it. But the student loan, you are going to have to repay. And it is, you want to be really careful because that debt is so easy to have that mount up. I was reading an article this morning from Wall Street Journal about a mom who's paying off $300,000 for her students' undergraduate student loans. So just a ridiculous amount of money, but it's just really easy to fall down that set of stairs and get deeper and deeper and deeper into debt. The existence of the Pell Grant and the student loans is one of the reasons why colleges are able to raise their tuition so much, because they know that you as the student can pay more because the federal government's coming along and giving you these loans. So they can raise their tuition in order to capture all of that revenue off of you. So I would just be really cynical and careful about taking those student loans. That's not to say you're wrong if you do it. I think that there are a lot of situations where that's the decision that you need to make. But I would encourage you to not just do it sort of blindly, because that's not just free money. It's money you're going to have to pay back, and you want to think really critically through what, how much money do you really need? I remember when I was in college seeing guys buying their snowboards and jet skis and all kinds of ridiculous things with their student loan money, just not realizing really this is going to have a consequence as you eventually have to pay all of this off. So be really careful about that. And you will notice when you go and visit a campus that the recruiters, as they walk you through, and you really need to visit the campus. It's really important to spend a little bit of time, just see where you're going to be and see what it's going to be like. And one of the things you'll notice is that the recruiters tend to spend a lot of time taking you through all the amenities that have nothing to do with the actual education. This is what your student loans are paying for. The rec center, the pool, all of these facilities that really have very little to do with your actual classroom. It's kind of sad when you look at the typical college budget, how small of a percentage their budget is actually going to pay for the professors. It's the football team, it's the spa, like whatever on the campuses. That's what your loans can get really maxed out paying for. I would encourage you to look for a place where your money is going to be maximized in spending it on the actual education itself. I think that's really critical. I think I've got some questions here. So let me just dive into this, and then I can hand it back to Grace. From Valerie. Okay. Yeah. So great question. So I want to be really clear that I just, again, I'll probably get in trouble with my board when I say this, but I don't think New St. Andrews is for everybody. I fully admit and see that there are times when it's not the right education for you. And also there are times when maybe somebody shouldn't be going to college. Maybe they're having this a pressure put on them to be something that they really aren't. So I think you need to really think about, is this something that you really want? That said, I do think that the classical model at the college level is far more versatile than a lot of people realize. Our graduates go on to just a whole wide range of different careers, from we have filmmaking, we have authors, to really successful business guys. They do NSA, and then they do an MBA in business. One did an MBA at Vanderbilt. He's now a VP at Goldman Sachs. Another did his MBA at Notre Dame. He's now a VP. He's a CFO at a major investment firm in New York. So you put this foundation of critical thinking, and then you put particular professional skills on top, and you can go in a whole wide variety of different directions. Some go on to entrepreneurial business, some go on to teaching, some go on to pastoral ministry, some have gone on from an education at NSA to a degree in law and can be quite successful in the law field. I think actually law is one of the great places. We are really good for preparing people to go on to something like law school. And we now have a number that have gone from NSA and then transitioning into a medical career. I've got a number of students right now that are off at med school with an NSA undergraduate. So it really doesn't need to limit you in terms of where you go. I think a couple places where it is more difficult would be if you want to go into mechanical engineering or if you want to go into nursing. Right now, I think you have to do more, you have to retake more of your undergraduate degree than I think is useful. And so I'm hopeful that we in the near future will be able to pair NSA with some programs so you can go on to engineering and nursing in a clearer path. But those two areas are the ones that I say, okay, you can still do it. And I've seen a lot of students do it from NSA into those careers, but I don't think that the degree converts as easily as it could. And almost every other career I have seen it convert really, really well. And one of the things I like about it is the way that you don't need to know your freshman year what you're going to be, because you haven't narrowed your options. You're keeping your options open as you see all the different directions that you might get to go. But I think that places where a state school can be really useful would be, first of all, the truth is NSA, we're about 13,000. We do work with financial aid to try to help students meet that if they can't make 13,000, but there are some students who can afford 2,000, right? And it may be that a state university might be their best bet. A state university mixed with a really good Christian community support network might be their best deal. I think if you're going on to an engineering degree, a state university is important to probably be at least a piece of what you're doing. Maybe you're at NSA for a couple of years and then you head on to a university like that. I would say the more rigorous and the more excellent the university is, to be honest, and this now up until now I've just been speaking in terms of professional qualification and quality of education and whatnot, but now I want to speak from the perspective of your faith and the development of your faith. The more excellent and rigorous the school is, the more dangerous to your faith it is. The more they can challenge you, the more they can wreck you. And I've seen that just firsthand so often. I did go to Oxford and I did a master's at Oxford in Jewish studies, and then I did my doctoral work there as well. But when I went to Oxford, I already had my undergraduate, I already had one master's, I was married, I had 5 kids, and I was an elder in our church. And so when I arrived in Oxford, there was a certain kind of weight that I had behind me that allowed me to stand firm in what was a really intense time of testing in terms of the intellect and your faith and all kinds of different things. If I at 18 had gone to Oxford, in all honesty, I think I would have gotten destroyed. I really do. It is a very heady place. It is a place that it goes to your head really quick. There are a lot of egos there and a lot of people there puffing up your egos about how excellent and amazing and rare you are to be at a place like this. And the money there is just ridiculous and obscene, and the amount of privilege and the amount of everything, it is really easy for that to go to your head. And so it was really good that I had a wife that I could go home to every evening and would deflate me and all of my arrogance that might be building up. And I had little kids to jump on me and to bring me back down to reality and remember who I was. I think that was actually just really, really important. I think a degree at a place like Oxford or an American Ivy League school could be fantastic, but I would really encourage you to think about that for your master's degree. In terms of the thing that Oxford is good for is that the name recognition is pretty much unequaled, and so you get all of and the education itself was obviously really rigorous and excellent. But I got all of that at the doctoral level, and I get all the advantage and the prestige and everything of that at the doctoral level, while I don't have the foundation threatened the way I think I would have had I gone for my undergraduate. So my recommendation is to continue to build your faith and your coherent worldview with a rigorous Christian liberal arts undergrad, and then put certain professionalization on top of that. And notice I am sort of suggesting something here that's worth acknowledging, which is that your your undergraduate degree is a time period where you're not yet done with your classical Christian education. And here's why I say that. If you're an adult listening in, then think about this for yourself, or if you're a high school student listening in, think about this with regard to what you've heard from your parents. The years from 18 to 22, are those the insignificant years? From 18 to 22, are those the years where nothing much happened? Are those the years where it was like you kind of knew what you were and no big changes in your life happened? Or were those the years where you maybe became a Christian, maybe had your understanding of the faith radically changed as you became alive theologically and in terms of your evangelical devotion? Or were those the years where either your faithfulness was tempted, or maybe there was compromise that you deeply regret, that lingers with you for the rest of your life? With regard to your marriage, were those the years that actually played a huge disproportionate role into putting you in the marriage that you're in now, or were those years utterly insignificant for that? Are those the years for you where you figured out professionally where you were headed, what kind of person you wanted to be, what your real passions were, what your skills were? Or were those the years where, you already knew what you're going to be and you just plodded on? It's shocking to me how much we all know that those are some of the most impressionable years out there. Like, we really, right now we're seeing is, some studies give us up to about a 70% casualty rate of evangelical kids going out to college and falling away from the faith during those 4 years. A lot happens during those 4 years. Not nearly as much in your graduate years. It's in those 4 years that all of this happens. I think it's really important to pick a place where, when you walk through that, you are going to be surrounded by people who are building into you a rigorous, faithful Christian worldview and helping you to process all the different things that are going on in your life. Our college, we have, when I track our alumni, 15 years out after graduation, we have a less than 2% divorce rate. Why is that? I think it's because there's a particular thing that's happening during the 4 years they're here, where their understanding of what kind of husband or wife they want to find, what kind of husband, wife they want to be, how they would develop the disciplines to be faithful in a marriage like that. There's certain things that are being instilled in them during this time where they're living in the midst of a godly community, giving them advice and counsel and all of that, that I think is just really, really critical. And so I don't think your undergraduate years are the years where, well, we did a K-12 classical Christian, now it's time to give them a certification to get a particular job. There's still so much that's actually happening during these 4 years, and it's not to patronize or belittle them and say you're still a child. It's to say you're entering into this moment that actually you're transitioning into an adult. You're owning the faith for yourself, and it's really good to have a particular kind of intellectual network around you for that time, for that period, to make sure that this is happening in a faithful way. That's my argument for why I think you ought to at least consider that. And again, with a disclaimer that I understand that for some people, that's not going to be the path that God would have them take, that maybe they need to go somewhere else. But I think it's something worth at least to consider. Let me hand it off to Grace and see if there are any other things I need to follow up on.
Thank you, Dr. Merkle. That was great. I'm going to give my short presentation, and then we can transition to Q&A either for me or for you. But so just so you guys know, I've been working in recruiting and admissions for a few years, so I'm hoping to give you all a little insider information, as well as I reflect on my time in the admissions process when I was applying to NSA and other schools, things I wish I had known. But to start off, I'll just hit on some quick notes. So a common misconception for college application is that you have to have every piece of your application ready to go before you start your application. But for New St. Andrews College and most other schools, the application process to a college is a process. It's not a 5-button survey. So you can, and we highly recommend that you start an application maybe even before you have your best standardized test score or your high school transcript ready to go. So that's another thing, and kind of similarly related, starting a college application is not a commitment. You are committed to a college when you commit. That application process is the process for opening the door and seeing if we don't admit every student that applies. So that process is to help you and to help us figure out whether or not you're a good fit. Another thing I like to mention, especially with a homeschool audience, that is that standardized tests are really important to schedule out far in advance. It is feasible to apply as a senior having never taken a standardized test, but it is more complicated. And we highly recommend that you try to take a standardized test during the summer or spring of your junior year. And there's a couple reasons behind that. The standardized tests, half of the battle, in my opinion, is being familiar with a format. And if you're a senior, you started an application and you have one shot at the SAT or the ACT or the CLT, you could have a bad day, and that could make that process difficult. Anyway, so that's another thing we highly recommend. Also, at New St. Andrews College, we accept both the SAT and the ACT as well as the CLT. I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with the CLT. It's a new alternative to the SAT and ACT. But just to put it out there, we recommend that you take two. It's not necessary, this is a recommendation, but some students tend to do better on the SAT, or maybe they do better on the ACT. It is more work to prepare for a different test, but that's kind of that's something helpful that I wish I would have known 7 years ago. But yeah, and then the last thing I want to mention before we go into the Q&A are transcripts. Actually, let me we already did the poll. I know the majority of our audience here are homeschooling parents. I'll just leave it on this. This is probably my best slide here, so you can take a look. So contact information, course descriptions with grade point averages, and a cumulative GPA and parent signature. Okay, great. So let's open it up for questions now. Feel free to drop the questions on the question tab there at the bottom left-hand side of bar, I should say. and they can be for me or for Dr. Merkle. All right. Okay, great. What, do we have a preference? We do not have a preference. We will take whatever standardized test that that you choose. The classical learning test is doing, but I will plug the classical learning test just because they're doing a couple interesting things. They're doing a 2 more at-home proctored tests because of the pandemic. So if you are interested in signing up for a standardized test this summer, they've made it feasible to do that, which is kind of cool. Early application for fall of 2021 for us, and I'm sure for most other colleges, is already open. We usually the spring of your junior year is when we open 2021 applications. Awesome. That's a great question. So Holly asks, do we have any recommended high school curriculum that prepares us for the college? Actually, I'm gonna throw this one at Dr. Merkle, if that's okay. or I can take it too.
How rude, how rude. I mean, I think that I'm not as informed on that level. I know that like the kids who come out of classical Christian schools, combined with really classical conversations kids seem to have done really well. Veritas, Logos Online. I think most of those, I'm not sure that I have enough data to say, oh, this is the one that by far exceeds them all. But I think each of those categories has had really great students come out of it. It is, you want to make sure that you have somebody, I don't know, it's useful just to have some sort of frame of reference so you get a sense of how you're doing. Like, is what you're doing actually equal to what other people are doing? This is where some of the CLT work is useful. I know they've got some other tests, like I think they just came up with a CLT 8, which is like an 8th grade CLT test, where you start to get a sense of like, okay, how are we just on the national level? Are we evening out with others? I think that that can be really useful, but I've just seen such excellent kids come from all of those categories that I can't really pick one over another. I confess that when we were in England, we homeschooled for 3 years while we were there, and boy, were we not good at it. So I have immense respect for those of you that have tackled that, because that was just so, we were in over our heads in such an amazing amount. And when we came back, then had our kids at Logos School, which we've just tended to rely on their standards to help us see where we're going.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we pushed, well, dual enrollment classes are not something that we focus on, because we really want our students to have our experience. So a lot of, and this is super common in homeschool circles, where people be taking courses at a local community college, and then are able to apply some of those credits to do, for both high school and college. I did that. I was homeschooled in Texas. But when I compare my community college classes that counted as both high school and college credit, they are so far from anything I was getting at New St. Andrews. I didn't even talk to the register about the registrar about transferring credits.
Well, I think that those classes that you're describing there, those can be useful if you're wanting to skip your freshman and sophomore year. If you're going to a state college, like what I was describing earlier, and you want to skip those 2 years that are largely kind of box ticking, then all that early CLEP, whatever, dual enrollment or CLEP, where you can get out of your freshman and sophomore year, that can become useful to just jump straight into that junior and senior year at a state college. But that said, just be honest with yourself about the education that's happening. It is, as Grace said, you're not getting the same kind of rigor. So I was talking to a kid not too long ago who was telling me, he was a great fit for NSA. This all sounded really good. And then he lets me know, well, I've actually taken all of these extra classes, and so I would come in as a junior, and I have to break it to him. I'm sorry, I know that you've got the piece of paper for these classes, but you're not intellectually equipped to actually handle our junior level classes. You would need to get through our freshman and sophomore to be ready, because you'd get destroyed if you went in right now. But that just says something about like those 2 years at NSA actually really matter, and there's something really significant that we're doing through those classes. I've got 3 kids right now that are at NSA, a freshman, a sophomore, and a junior, and just the dinner conversation and watching what has happened to them over these 3 years is just incredible to see the kind of intellectual transformation that happens during that time, which wouldn't happen in those dual credit or dual enrollment classes. But if you want to use those to get into the junior year of state college, I think that would be a really good strategy.
Great. We have a few more questions about dual enrollment. We do accept transfer credit from other colleges, but historically we do not accept dual enrollment classes unless they are in our dual enrollment agreements. And at this point, the only dual enrollment class that we offer is an introductory Latin. It is with Kepler Roman Roads, taught by Jonathan Roberts. And I just put the link in the chat there. Great. Okay, out of curiosity, how many hours a week do NSA students spend in class, and how many hours do they spend home studying? That's a great question.
We do each year. We do an annual survey where it's our workload survey. We move it from term to term so that we get a sense each year where we'll do first term the first year, second term the second year, so that we're constantly getting a sense of what the course load is looking like, and if there's something that needs to be adjusted in one direction or other, because we don't want something to become too weighty or not weighty enough. So we actually have pretty good data on that, and we're pretty close to that 1960 number that I was describing before. So a typical student at NSA, this is a full-time job. They're in the 35 to 40 hours a week, including actually attending classes and then all the work that needs to be done to be ready for those classes. I think that, so some kids, and of course there's a spectrum. Some kids who are amazingly blazing fast readers and whatnot can get that work done in a short amount of time. But I think it's realistic to say you're going to be working on schoolwork in the 35 to 40 hours a week. The classes, so let me just give you a quick breakdown of what the NSA workload looks like. So the 4 years, each year you typically have 4 classes. 4 classes is a full-time load, and you have 4 terms, so 4 classes each term. Those classes, we have, the bulk of them are year-long colloquia, so there'll be a first-term version of it, second term, third, and a fourth-term version of it. And each one usually starts with maybe a 2-hour lecture at the beginning of the week, followed by a 1-hour recitation at the end of the week. That's the standard classic NSA class. Now there are variations. Some of the language classes will do 3 1-hour things over the course of the week. Music is a little different, and some of the sciences have a different kind of lab sort of setup. But the typical class is a 2-hour lecture, and then a 1-hour recitation at the end of the week. The 2-hour lecture is an orienting lecture from the professor, helping you, introducing you to a subject, to the reading, introducing you to the important questions. And then you get a stack of reading and some very specific questions that you're going to come to a small group recitation. And the small group recitation is maybe 6 to 8 students, a small group with the same professor. We don't do a TA, something like that. Your professor is the one you're going to meet in a small group. And sometimes that might be at the professor's house in a small group, or sometimes down here at the office. It's a small town, and there's a lot of, I don't know, we're having students over our houses and things like that all the time. But in that small group, then the idea is then the student is going to be speaking with the professor, giving them lots of feedback on their answer. And really what we're trying to do over the course of the year there, well, the course of 4 years, is teach a student to be able to grab a subject, pour through the literature, prepare their own take on it, come prepared to speak on it, to write about it, to argue about it, to hold their own, and to undergo a certain amount of pushback from the professor, which I think translates to, over life, the ability to go out and say, okay, I don't know anything about that, but I know how to learn. I know how to figure that out, to get the work done without somebody breathing over me, and to come ready to persuade others of my position. That's why I think it's a good undergrad for law, for entrepreneurial business, for all host of different things. But that's kind of the typical NSA week, with a disputatio at the end, which is the whole student body comes together for a different speaker of some sort. But that's the way it would play out.
Thank you. And we have a question for you, Dr. Merkle, but could you speak on preparation in math and science for NSA? Would it be helpful to do classes like calculus and physics?
Yeah.
And how does that work?
Yeah, I think that it's good to do, I think it's good to do those classes just because it's good to do those classes. Both calculus and physics teach you to think in a certain way and do a certain kind of work. I remember my son told his high school teacher that he was going to NSA, and he said, his high school teacher said, well, then you don't need calculus or physics. And my son was like, no, I want them because I want to understand them. And it's really important that I understand them. So he did calculus and physics. But what you find is that we actually have a 1-year math colloquia that students go through that includes quite a bit of calculus in it. Now, if you're, it is from a more philosophical angle. And so if you're not a strong math person, I think you're able to still work with it. But I do think that people who have had calculus have a strong advantage in coming into that class and having basically an understanding of the concepts that that Dr. Stokes is trying to convey to you. But I highly recommend both calculus and physics. And I think it's an important part of your high school education. If you don't have it, I think we can still get you through, but I do think that would be a really important piece to bring to it.
And just to add something to that, I think that's really great. But at New St. Andrews, we have a very applied approach to liberal arts. At many schools, liberal arts is primarily a great books and philosophy exclusive experience. But although we do have many literature classes and theology and philosophy classes, students have to take pretty technical music classes, science classes, and the way we teach language is also very technical. So having both those left and right brain training in high school is really great. I know we're a little over time here, but if there's any last questions, we could maybe answer one more, or if there isn't, that's fine. Well, thank you all so much for coming. We will be hosting another webinar same time tomorrow. This is the same, using the same link. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you, Dr. Merkle.
Thank you.